Xiong Yuhing was born in the Shuishi village in Guangdong, China, nearly a century ago. It was at a time and into a culture which provided, by today's standard, little opportunity and freedom for girls such as herself. Life for her was rigid and prescriptive. Obey and serve the parents and elderlies as a girl. Marry when and to whom your family decides. Raised your children as if your life depended on it. Simple, yet hardly easy. For all of her 98 years she adhered to the script dutifully. Despite the lack of adequate education and resources, due to war, revolution, and many other challenges. That led to long separation from her parents, husband, and young children. Miraculously, in this southwest corner of Canada, she reunited with her parents and siblings. And got to witness all her children, grand and great-grandchildren grew, married and flourished into her golden years. Now finally laid to rest, surrounded by so many that love her dearly. This is the life story of Xiong Yuhing, as her youngest child remembers it. My mom didn't talk much about her childhood, so I'm not too certain, but those years appeared stable and happy. Life etched with hardships began around the time the Japanese marched into Guangdong in the late 1930s. Her family fled to Macau for a period, and upon returning at age 17 she married my dad. And gave birth to my big sister Carolina a year later, in 1942. Often Mom recounted how little rice was being rationed, and how she would give her share to her baby girl, while subsisting on watery congee and few leaves of greens herself. Undoubtedly that experience burnt into her being to never waste any food, however spoiled it may be. After the war, 2 more daughters were born, Marcia in 1945 and Vicky in 1949, which was after the start of the Chinese Civil War. That political upheaval forced Dad to flee to Hong Kong, so he never met Vicky until much later. As the revolution took hold, and land became nationalized, Mom was forced to leave her young girls and elderly in-laws behind, and ventured out of the village to earn what she could to keep the family fed. She ended up in Guangzhou as caretaker for a professor's family, as well as washing and ironing for others trying to make ends meet. She would send every cent she earned back home, but over time, she would end up selling off what little dowry she had to supplement the shortfalls. During those desperate times, she recounted often, she would hide in the rooftop and cried herself to sleep. However hopeless and impossible, she kept at it, until eventually Dad sent for her in 1955, leaving the 3 daughters behind. 1956 my brother Dennis was born, then Mom returned to our village with him during the following Lunar New Year. They brought Vicky out to Hong Kong then, and met her dad for the first time at age 7. That summer Marcia also left and joined the family in Hong Kong, with only Carolina remaining in China attending school. She was eventually allowed to join us in Hong Kong in 1962, and was married to Carlos and emigrated to Nicaragua shortly after. Unfortunately, Mom's struggle continued due to Dad's health issues, and her lack of marketable skill in the rapidly modernizing city. Fortunately for me, the difficult circumstances didn't prevent her from accidentally having her last child, in 1959. I can only imagine the decision to add another mouth to feed must have been a difficult one. So goes my favorite saying, it's better to be lucky than good. Admittedly biased and unreliable, my earliest memory of her was that of a happy mother, spending precious moments laughing while coddling me. During those times she would call me by several endearing nicknames, but in village dialect, so the meaning of which I was never quite certain. It would have been a nice fairy tale had I been the lucky charm that turned everything around, but alas, her struggles continued. Those brief happy moments quickly became fewer and farther in between as the drudgery of survival in the big city wore on. I recall her working long hours, often 7 days a week as a sweatshop seamstress. It didn't help that my brother and I were closer to Dad than Mom emotionally. Her salvation came in the form of spirituality in Buddhism, which ironically caused her to be further isolated from us. Dad favored modern thinking, and we children of course would much prefer the movies and amusement park with him than to pray at the temples with her. The only fond memory of temple visits was an overnight family retreat at the monastery on Lantau Island. Dennis and I otherwise hated having to accompany her to the weekly evening rituals at various places of worship that went on all during the late 60s. Two other events of significance in this time period: first, my second sister Marcia marrying Henry, and moved to Nicaragua where Carolina and family were. The other was my mom's sister and husband, Auntie Ethel, and Uncle Tim determined effort to sponsor our family to immigrate to Canada. Without their sponsorship and financial help, our family would have never got the fresh start that we desperately needed at that time. My mom was never tired of reminding us that we owe much of the comfort and success we enjoyed for the past 50 years to our generous aunt and uncle. With the aforementioned help from Aunt Ethel and Uncle Tim, our family of 5, Mom, Dad, Vicky, Dennis and I, landed in Victoria in June 1972. Within a year, we were also joined by Carolina's and Marcia's families. Life for Mom became more stable and joyful, with support from many on her side of the family. However, the desire to provide a better future for Dennis and I soon motivated her and Dad to leave the comfort behind. From 73 to 79, Dad joined the grocery store keeper rank, running Columbia Produce in New West, while Mom worked again as a seamstress at Jansen in Vancouver. Meanwhile, Vicky remained in Victoria and married Tony in 1973. Those early winter morning bus rides into Vancouver must have been brutal for her, who grew up in the subtropics, not helped by her total lack of body fat. After selling the store in New West in 1979, Mom and Dad took their first ever vacation to Hawaii for 7 days. They then moved back to the island to settle in Sydney, taking over Carlos and Carolina's Kingwa groceries. It was then that Mom became proficient in conversational English.
How are you? Players regular. Okay, 250 please. Thank you, bye.
In addition to sharing cashier duties, she also made sure all her grandchildren were exposed to basic Cantonese.
食飯，飽飽，點蟲蟲，蟲蟲飛，all dum dum.
Mom and Dad finally retired in the mid-1980s and built their dream home on Panorama Drive in Victoria. In her leisure, she tended to her vegetable garden, always weary of food insecurity, and learned to enjoy playing mahjong. Truth be told, she was never very good at it, as it was not her nature to care about winning, especially from family and friends. I think she had the most fun when she caught herself making silly mistakes, like forgetting to pick a flower or sick jar woo. Her spontaneous laughter at those moments is what I will miss most. In the early 90s, around the time Dennis and Isidora's first daughter Vanessa was born, Mom and Dad moved back to Vancouver to help care for their newest granddaughter. They soon sold their house on Panorama Drive to Vicky and Tony, and moved into the house in which she and Dad lived until their final years. While Dad was with us, the two would explore the cities on local buses, as well as traveled fair a bit, visiting many parts of Canada, US and Asia. They even took a few trips back to our village, where they lived for a few months in our ancestral home they rebuilt. Mom never said anything to me, but I wonder how bittersweet it was for her to be back in the surroundings that brought her so much trauma. After Dad died in 2001, Mom remained reasonably healthy for a number of years. She kept up with daily Luk Ton Kwan practice, breathing, and eye exercises, which she eagerly tried to teach her grandchildren whenever they're within earshot. Dennis and my families, along with Vicky, accompanied her to visit our village and paid her respect to our ancestors one last time in 2007. That was the last overseas big trip for her. As she matched towards her 90s, she struggled with issues of circulation in her legs and began losing her mobility. My family took our last trip with her, together with Dennis' family in 2013, cruising to Alaska. Thereafter, Dennis and my sisters would take Mom to shorter cruises where walking was kept to a minimum, the last in 2018 to San Fran. As her physical conditions worsened, she was more and more homebounded. The burden of caring for her fell heavily on the shoulders of Dennis and his family. My sisters and I tried to lessen his load by having Mom stay with us occasionally, but I know I could have done more. My sisters and I are truly grateful that Mom have been so well cared for, and rather than at a senior facility, got to live at home with Dennis' family until her final days. After relinquishing the practice of pure vegetarianism in 2011, Mom became a bit of a foodie, liking especially my homemade pizza and IHOP hash browns. And her favorite hangout while in Victoria was Golden City. She would sometimes eat there 3 meals a day. Even with her mobility issue, she was always energized by special family celebrations, be it weddings, new births, graduations, or birthdays. With the ever-growing family tree, there were more and more such happy occasions each and every year. However, the pandemic in 2020 put a sudden halt to them, and undoubtedly accelerated her steady decline physically and mentally. My siblings and I noticed sadly that the enthusiasm for food she developed also vanished in recent years. Blessed that we got to celebrate her 98th birthday just a few weeks ago with many of the family she hasn't seen in a long while in attendance. In closing, it's fair to say Mom had as tough of a start in life as anyone I know. I can't imagine the willpower it took to fight through the obstacle after obstacle life threw at her. She accepted the responsibilities, fairly or unfairly laid upon her, and soldiered on, never giving up. Her will and tenacity to overcome are qualities that we all would do well to emulate. With the turmoil of her first few decades behind her, she found joy and happiness in the latter half of her life. I must also confess and apologize to my mom for being quick to dismiss her thinking as being too traditional and old-fashioned, and for being annoyed at her instinctive aversion of risks, fearing for the worst rather than embracing the opportunity. I recognize now the origin of her fear, given her early life experiences. Ironically, the reason I don't share my mom's conservative views is in large part owed to her hard work, steadfastly providing a stable and nourishing environment in which I can realize my potentials. I succeeded because she succeeded. My achievement is very much her achievement. To varying extents, the same can be said of all who belong to her family tree, which includes, according to my spreadsheet, 3 daughters and 2 sons, 3 sons-in-law, 2 daughters-in-law, 8 granddaughters, 4 grandsons, 3 granddaughters-in-law, 4 grandson-in-laws, 8 great-granddaughters, and 5 great-grandsons. I hope she was, and is, proud of all of us. May she never stop smiling upon us from above, with Dad by her side.